Tone Carter from Restorative DC. I am one of the restorative program specialists here at Restorative DC, which is a project of SchoolTalk. I just want to welcome everyone. I'm really excited for this, and I hope everyone gets out a lot of the information that they need. And if you have any questions, please feel free to write them down so I can get to them in the appropriate time. So first, I'm going to give a little bit about myself. I began my work with Restorative Practices roughly 4 years ago, where I was a member of the Restorative Practice implementation team at Cardozo Education Campus. This was an amazing experience. I decided to do this work after my year as a core member for City Year, and I realized that there had to be another way to school discipline other than the traditional methods. So today, we're here to talk about why restorative. Why is this actually important? So Restorative DC is a project of SchoolTalk, as I said earlier, and it is in partnership with DC Public Schools, and this webinar is also funded by OSSE as well. So let's get started. Today's objectives are to explore the background, to explore the background and need for restorative justice, to define the continuum of restorative justice practices, and share firsthand experiences of implementing restorative justice practices within DC schools. So first thing that we're going to talk about is the school to prison pipeline. This is one of the main reasons why we're doing this work. As we all know, traditional methods of discipline within the schools do not work. So to start us off, I'm going to show this video so that we can get a better understanding for those who might not understand the school to prison pipeline, or those who just need a refresher.
The school to prison pipeline is the description of how the school system is set up to push you into the prison system. School's no longer a community. School's no longer a family, a place where we're always welcome.
You walk into school, the first thing you see is a metal detector. The first face that greets you is a school police officer.
All the kids want to do is go to school. They don't want to go to school to be labeled a criminal.
When folks talk about the school to prison pipeline, it's real. There's a direct correlation to lack of education, economic opportunity, and also incidences of incarcerations.
We have had kids in the system, hitting somebody with a ruler. We've had kids in the system tussling or fighting in a hallway.
They put me in a cell, took me and handcuffed me to the chair.
I sat in the cell for 11 and a half hours.
I was having an emotional breakdown because I knew in my heart that I didn't really do anything. I just felt like I was being criminalized.
These are my kids, and this system has taken them and turned them into something they're not.
I think zero tolerance actually makes schools more dangerous. It creates the illusion of safety, but not the reality.
The concept of zero tolerance makes no sense anywhere for anything.
It's a recipe for disaster for a lot of young folks. We know that it doesn't work. It would be insane to continue this policy.
To feel alienated and to feel watched in your own school is not healthy for that student.
If you disrupt the positive things going on in his or her life, they may never get that back.
This criminalization is not just an inner city problem. It's happening in every school district, suburbs, inner city, all over the place.
What if we stopped and we looked at each one of these students as a human being and said, what can we do to help you become a better student?
Okay, thank you everyone. I hope everyone enjoyed that small short video. I'm just gonna give you all a couple of statistics about the school to prison pipeline. Schools typically have prison-like environments where they have surveillance cameras, school and local police on campus, as well as metal detectors. A lot of our students come into school with a lot of baggage from the outside. However, they're met with they're not met with kindness or good morning or hello. That's really important for students' morale within the school building, as well as students have also been arrested for minor misdemeanors or even things that students shouldn't even be arrested for. For example, a kindergartner throwing a temper tantrum or scribbling on a desk or a science experiment gone bad. These are just small examples of things that students were arrested for within the school building. Also, 70% of students involved in school arrests are Black or Hispanic. That is a huge problem. And those demographics are showing within our adult jails as well. That those demographics are heavily populating the jail system, and also over 3 million students receive out of school suspensions annually. That is a lot of students being taken out of the learning environment, as well as maybe a comfort zone for them, and that puts a huge strain on the students' success and connection and engagement within the school. So here's some more challenges that the students face. Lack of support when their needs aren't met. Some students need more supports in class, and the way to respond to when those needs aren't met is them acting out. That is a thing that is very common within schools, no matter what the demographic is. And that's one thing. Is also students are suspended for minor infractions like chewing a Pop-Tart into a gun or not even having their shirt tucked in when they're walking in school. Kids are being sent home. And there's also neighborhood issues, specifically within the DC area. Neighborhood issues are a huge thing within the district. Some students can't walk through certain neighborhoods because of where they're from, which can lead to either truancy or the students just arriving late all the time or leaving school early all the time. And those are just some of the small challenges that some of our students face. Also, the students and their families aren't the only ones who are facing challenges. Staff members in the building are facing challenges as well. Some have too many initiatives. They're feeling overwhelmed by the amount of work that's being placed on their plate. I know specifically I met with a couple teachers recently, and I advised them, I was like, maybe we could try circles in the classroom. They're saying, it's too much work. It's too much work. I can't do it. I don't have the time. I have all these initiatives that I have to accomplish. I have my caseload for inclusion teachers. And that's a real thing. That's something that a lot of staff members have struggles with. And this is just a suggestion. Sometimes using circles during warm-ups or do-nows, that helps get the students to center themselves, to come into class ready, to leave what happened within the hallway or at lunch outside of the classroom, and then it allows them to be ready to learn. Also, teachers and staff face a lack of support, sometimes from admin. Sometimes teachers do not feel supported by the supervisors within the school building, and then lack of parent involvement is a big thing in the district as well. We're trying to find ways to engage our parents more so they're more inclined to help with our students, because if the student will always succeed at a higher rate if the school and the staff and the teachers and the student all work together to ensure that student is on track to getting where they need to get. So what is restorative justice, right? Restorative justice is a culture and set of practices that engages a whole community in building relationships and repair harm through mutual, inclusive dialogue, understanding, and cooperation. Restorative justice isn't a new thing. It stems from indigenous cultures. That this is the societal norm for them. To sit in a circle and discuss problems prior to a huge criminal justice system being developed. This is how they solved problems. And as a society and as a community, specifically within the district, this is a route that we're taking. And for those challenges that I listed earlier, these this model addresses these challenges. Relationships will be built with students and teachers so that students feel comfortable stating their frustrations, stating what's going on, opening up the lines of communication amongst the families and the staff a whole lot better, and as well as the community partners. So restorative justice has principles, right? These 3 pillars of restorative justice. The first one is harm and needs. Restorative justice focuses on the harm and needs, not rule breaking and punishment. A lot of times in traditional discipline models, we focus on the fact that a student broke a rule or a person broke a rule or a law and now they deserve a consequence, not realizing that there's other instances or other reasons of why that rule or that law has been broken. The next pillar is accountability and responsibility. Which is like wrongs and harms result in obligation of restitution. So it holds people accountable for their actions. It allows people to state who the people who have committed the harm, state that, oh, yes, I did this, and be honest with each other and be honest with the person that they have affected. And the last pillar is enlarge circles of stakeholders for resolutions. Restorative justice promotes engagement and participation. If the stakeholders and everyone involved have an opportunity to come up with the agreement together, they're more inclined to, the restitution rates are higher, and they're more inclined to actually not repeat the offense again, or not to repeat the harm that they did to the person. These 3 pillars are essential in creating a restorative environment, especially within the school building. So the social discipline window, right, has 2 axes, right? The social discipline window is the underlying premise of restorative practices. It rests with the beliefs that people will make positive changes when those in position of authority do things with them rather than to them or for them. So as you see with our social discipline window, we have 2 axes, the structure and the connection, right? So we're going to start at the bottom left quadrant, the neglectful, the irresponsible quadrant, right? It's when you have low structure and a low connection. That's typically like when you see a kid walk down the hallway with a hat on and you're just like, this kid is a kid that I don't have a good relationship with. I'm really not in the mood. I had a long day. I had 3 observations, or I'm just having a tough day. I'm just not going to say anything. That happens more often than not, especially in my experience. I've seen it personally. And then when you have a high structure, right, and you have a low connection, that is our traditional school discipline models based off of. Like that's what it's based off. It's punitive. It's authoritarian. It's you broke this rule, so you're suspended. You're going to do this because I said so, and those are the results and the consequences of breaking that law or rule. So, all right, so that's obviously not working. So let's try this way. Let's have low structure with a high connection, right? That's 4. It's permissive, right? A lot of times when we build these relationships with students, we see we can be taken advantage of. We want them to succeed so bad that we're willing to do things for them, and that does not allow our students and the people we work with to benefit and grow on their own. It changes everything, and it really puts us in front of the person that needs to grow and that needs these services or needs the help. All right, so all 3 of those didn't work, right? None of those are ideal or beneficial for our students as well as for the people we serve. So when we have a high structure and a high connection, that's when we do things with. It's restorative. It's authoritative. We do things with our students. We don't fill out their FAFSA for them. We assist them and help them and do it while they're doing it and do it along with them. Now that's restorative. That's ideally what we would want within the school building, what's needed within the school building, because obviously the other 3, as you can see, the other 3 quadrants do not work. And they're not beneficial to the growth of our students, and they do not create the learning environment that we desire for our students. So, as we stated earlier, right, restorative justice isn't about laws being broken. That's retributive justice. Now we've applied a name to it, right? That's What laws have been broken? Who did them? Right? Who broke the law? What do they deserve? Like, if I take a piece of candy from the store, I should be arrested because I stole a piece of candy from the store. That's retributive justice, right? So now, but we're moving to restorative justice. Who has been hurt? What are their needs? Whose obligation are those needs to be fulfilled, right? Who has a stake in this situation? So you're looking at the people that are directly involved, and they are coming up with the decisions on how to make their conflict better, right? To bring the community back, because obviously the community has been strained. And what are the appropriate processes are involved for stakeholders in the efforts to make things right, right? So what are we going to do? What are we trying to do? What works for that specific person? There's no mold for when harm has been done within the community. It allows everything to be personalized, so that it allows everything to be personalized, so that every situation is handled. The process is the same, but the agreements and the outcomes might not always be the same. So here's the paradigm shift, right? It's a change in the mindset. It's a change in how we do things, right? So, of course, the traditional way we do things is retributive, right? The strongest human drive, it's for fear and avoiding consequences. And offenses defined as like violations of laws, like you did this and this is a terrible thing because you broke the law. And then accountability through the process is like guilt and imposes punishment. No one is truly held accountable, because in a retributive system, the person who did the harm can always say that they didn't do it. They're not held accountable. They do not step up and actually admit and state what they did, right? So we're shifting to this restorative mindset, right? Where the strongest human drive is compassion, right? Being in a right relationship, like offenses of harm and arising from and affecting individuals, relationships, and community. So they're not just like rules that have been broken, but it relies on people that have actually been hurt, people that are actually having problems. And then accountability is through an inclusive process of understanding and repairing the harm. So people are held accountable for their actions. They're made to, it's so that people actually, the offender has to actually admit, not offender, I apologize. The person who has done the harm has to come out and acknowledge what they've done. So now we go into the restorative practice continuum, right? So as you can see, there's proactive and there's also responsive. So the proactive side is generally teachers, counselors, social workers within the school building, educational aides, behavior. They handle the effective statements, the I statements to students, right? The dialogue circles when you have the students sit down and it's like community building, like how was your weekend? How are things going, right? Then you have the responsive side, right? Where it has the restorative questions typically used in the small impromptu conferences, things with the behavior staff or the administration. Then you have restorative conversations when a huge problem has happened within the school community. And then you also have the community conferencing. The community conferencing is when we get everyone together, the people that's been harmed, their supporters, resources, to figure out how we can do this and come up with a contract/agreement on how to make this harm right. So that leads us into the whole school approach, right? As you see that the whole school approach is shaped within a pyramid, right? The base is strong. It's bigger than everything else. It's the community building, right? The universal prevention. We use this term, the 80-20 rule, right? Where if 80% of the time you're being proactive, then that only leaves 20% of the time where you're being responsive. So essentially, the more proactive you are, the less responsive you have to be, right? So it leaves the effective statements and the proactive circles. They're in the community building / classroom interventions area. And in classroom interventions area, it's a little bit smaller, but it still holds like a foundation size, right? Then we get to restorative questions and responsive circles and conferences. That's for intensive interventions. That's the 20%. that's the smaller part of our pyramid. Because if we work hard and with the community building, then as you know, as I stated earlier, it will lead to less and less and less responsive approaches. And that is what we call a restorative culture. So, restorative discipline, right? This is how we would want people to respond to the disciplinary things that happen within the school building, right? So first thing is acknowledging that relationships are central to building community. Traditionally, no relationship is needed, and consequences were enough to right the wrong. It was all that was needed. Not to mention, it puts students in isolation. It takes students out of an environment that they might feel the most comfortable in. And that's not how you saw it, because now when the student comes back from the suspension, from the ISS, there's a sense of resentment to the staff, because they weren't held accountable. And then they're also taken out of an environment that was conducive to them. Number two, it builds systems that address misbehaviors and harm in a way that strengthens relationships. Relationships are not strengthened in traditional forms of discipline. It's you did this, and you did this and you're wrong, so this is what's going to happen. But there's no talking, there's no figuring out why the person did what they did or how they did what they did. And how was the person who was affected, how are they feeling? They have no voice, right? So the third one is focusing on harm done rather than only on rule breaking. Traditionally, breaking rules is number one, right? Consequences are already there. They already saw the problems caused by the rules that have been broken. In that moment, in a traditional setting, that is number one, right? That breaking a rule, that we already have things in place. We have a no tolerance laws, because this has to happen because you broke the law, right? So number four, it gives the voice to the person that's harmed, right? Typically, if a student's book bag is stolen, they're never given the ability to say, oh, I felt embarrassed because my book bag got stolen, or now I don't feel safe in our school environment because my book bag got stolen. No one gives them a chance to speak out and speak up about how they feel about the situation. The person harmed has no voice, and the authority in the situation is the person that's in control and is doing things to everyone rather than everyone working together to resolve the harm. Number five, engages in collaborative problem solving. In a traditional setting, it's not collaborative at all. The person who's in authority, that's the person whose voice matters most, and everyone should listen because they're the person that's in authority. They're the person that's in charge, and that typically doesn't work, especially when it comes to agreements. Everyone needs to have a handle or a voice in what happens after the harm has been done, so that everyone can follow suit. Everyone can follow what they said they were going to do. So the last, number six, is empowers change and growth. Traditional forms of discipline empower fear, right? It makes people scared to do things in fear of the consequences. And last but not least, it enhances responsibility. As I stated earlier, many times that traditional forms of discipline require zero to no responsibility. The person who committed the harm can always say, I never did it. Whereas in restorative justice, it always forces people, not forces, but the person is held accountable, and in order for the process to go forward, they have to claim responsibility for what they've done. So what are the results of restorative practices? What's reduced? The referrals go down, suspensions go down, because now there's those interventions that in place from the referrals are no longer there. Lack of instructional time to the students has gone down, and the disproportionate referrals to minority students has gone down tremendously, right? And now what is improved? Teacher retention and morale. Teachers feel better about the process once understood and they've gone through it. because if you have low morale in the school, no matter how good the teacher is, the mental health is always going to be more important. School climate gets better. Students feel better. Staff feel better. You see people in the morning. Good morning. Good morning. How you doing? Waving. Everyone's having a good time at work and at the school. Everyone is enjoying being there, not dreading as soon as they get in there that they're ready to go home. Engagement of the school community. More students participate in things. That's what we always want, right? We always want students to be lively. We want students to want to participate in all these great initiatives and ideas we have in the school building, but if they're not engaged, none of that matters. And then last but not least, student satisfaction and safety. We would want this. We're providing the service and we're serving our youth, right? We want them to be satisfied by what we're doing. In traditional settings, students don't feel safe. Students, because they either fear retaliation or they fear, or they're just not happy with the way things went down. So if you're the person that's harmed, you're scared because the person might come back. But then also, if you're the person that did the harm, now you're not happy with the way things happen. You're upset, and you're still trying to find a way to be in that space, because being taken out of that space, now you no longer feel as a part of the community. So today, like I said earlier, we're gonna have panelists speak today and give their feedback of exactly what this looks like. What does applying restorative practices and restorative justice practices in the school building, what does that look like? What does that look like for them in this process? It's a 3 to 5 year process. It's not going to happen overnight. Like I said earlier, it's a paradigm shift. So today we have Dr. Jane Connor and Mr. Yazid. Dr. Jane Connor, which is one of the consultants for Restorative DC. She currently works with the Seed Public Charter School as well as Luke Seymour Opportunity High School. And we also have Mr. Yazid Jackson from Cardozo Education Campus. He is the Restorative Practice Coordinator over there as well. So, Dr. Connor, can you please give us a little bit about yourself, some of the work you have done within this realm?
Okay, just checking. Are you able to hear me fine?
Yes, we are.
Okay, great. So, yes, I've had a long career in education, but the most rewarding part this last 10 or 15 years when I've been involved in restorative practices, it's really answered for me a lifelong set of questions. I never could understand as a child, how could it be that families, I was in a family where there was enough food and there was shelter and there was physical safety. And I knew that not having those could make people pretty miserable. But what I couldn't understand was how even when people had food and shelter and safety, they were still unhappy, and there was depression and addictions and mental illness. And how can we have quality lives? How can we relate to each other in ways that feel good and give us a sense of purpose and meaning? And that's how restorative practices is very, very broad, but it's also real and has helped me personally and professionally to be able to do things I never thought I'd be able to do. Got you.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Yazid Jackson, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your current work?
How you doing, everyone? Again, my name is Yazid Jackson. I am the Restorative Practices Coordinator at Cardozo Education Campus. Just a little bit of background. I have been doing restorative practices since 2005. My previous work experience was from a school called Glen Mills Schools, where it was adjudicated youth from all over the country, from cities Sacramento, Oakland, LA, Compton, Chicago, Miami, Dallas, Fort Worth, New York City, Philadelphia, and the list goes on. And we pretty much use this practice on a daily basis. And it was the cornerstone and the foundation of our work to get students who have committed heinous crimes and were court appointed to be there for 18 to 24 months. We did this practice, and our initial goal was to provide students with a skill set to be adequate youth outside of our facility. And we were very intentional about this work. And, you know, as a result, 82% of our students were able to graduate with a high school diploma. And that's with students that had 0 credits coming into our facility. Moving forward, currently, my role at Cardozo is the Restorative Practices Coordinator. And this is our 4th year with Restorative Practices. And this is, I would say, 3 years of really being intentional. Our first year, it was kind of laid out. So now we're very intentional about the work that we do. And we try to, we work on 3 components. We work on interpersonal relationships, student to student, interpersonal relationships with staff to student. Well, actually 4 components, staff to staff, and then also family engagement. And we've really shifted our discipline model to really be slow to go. And that's kind of our motto now, is just to be slow to go on, you know, decisions that we make as far as students, and making sure that we have observable outcomes when we make decisions based on another student's life and trajectory. So this is where we are now, and I love what I do. It's always enriching. You continue to learn a lot about the decisions that you make for other students and youth. So it's a reminder that this practice actually works.
Got you. Thank you. So we're gonna go to our next question, and in the first one, I'm gonna ask Mr. Jackson, how were you first introduced into restorative justice practices, and what was your initial reaction, and were you skeptical?
Initially, I didn't know I was doing it. I go back to 2005 when I started. It wasn't called Restorative Practices at that time. But moving forward, when I came to DCPS from Philadelphia Public Schools, we really got into the name of restorative practices, and the components stayed the same. There was a hesitation because it forces you to be vulnerable. It makes you feel like you actually lose power and control. I've always been really good at creating relationships with students and my colleagues, but I wasn't intentional about it. It was something that came natural. When I became intentional about it, I was able to listen more than speak. I was able to step back and collaborate more, and really engaging the students on decision making, because the reality is, and working in a high school, our students get told what to do for 4 years, and then what happens is they get out of school and they don't have the skill set to self-regulate or have any self-awareness. But it's a practice. It's a practice. I know a lot of times folks tried, it's not successful, and they say, oh, I'm gonna scratch that and I'm gonna go to something else. It's really a practice. And there are definitely steps. I'm pretty sure Mr. Carter will be able to get to that. There are steps to get to that point where you are comfortable with it, but it's a mind shift change rather than picking up a book and applying it immediately. It's definitely a mind shift change with you first, because students will then read and feel your energy. And if they don't feel like you're authentic in what you're saying and what you're doing, their response is going to be totally different to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Jane Connor, same question?
Well, yes. Well, I was exposed to restorative practices mostly through communications training initially. And I remember once I was teaching a class, and I was giving them some training in how to be able to really listen and hear what's in people's minds as well as what's in their hearts. And the next day, the student came back and he said, I really want to thank you for that training, because I was ready to lose my home. The people I was living with, I was sharing quarters, and they were so mad how I was, and I didn't get it. But I used the practices that you showed us and really heard what was going on. And it cut down, I avoided being defensive. And when they saw me listening and taking in what they had to say, and when I was able to acknowledge, yeah, you're right, my gosh, I have done that, and I get now how that's impacted you. I really want to work this out. They were so blown away that they were willing to give me another chance. And we're working things out, and I don't have to lose my home. So it was that kind of impact which you actually see really amazingly very quickly. I remember another training I went to, a student, I didn't lead that training, but a guest did. And the next time she came back and she said that just as a result of a 2-hour training at a parking ramp, she intervened and prevented what looked like was going to be a fight between a drunken man and his partner. But just by empathizing and noticing what was going on for the two and sharing that, they resolved it peacefully. So when you see something like that, I'm not saying it happens all the time right away especially, but stuff like that is unbelievable. And it made me a believer for sure.
Got you. Thank you both. We're going to go to our next question. I'm going to start off with Dr. Connor. What has implementation looked like in the schools you work with?
Well, every school is different. But in general, because what happens is people are overwhelmed by the number of disciplinary issues, of disrespect, non-compliance. People are really frustrated and they want a quick fix on that. So there's always some desire to bring a restorative mindset to the disciplinary issues. And usually some staff, maybe the dean of students or an assistant principal, will get intensive training and start using that approach. But it's time intensive, and without work also, you have to also introduce to the general staff, the teaching staff and so forth, what it means to build community by the dialogue circles. So usually we try to start both with dialogue circle training for the staff, that's crucial, and then some more intensive conflict resolution training for the more discipline-oriented staff.
Got you. Thank you. That's definitely a great insight on what it looks like on your side. Mr. Jackson, also, can you answer the question? I know you have a totally different perspective on the matter at hand.
Implementation looks a couple different ways. You have to really analyze your population, and that starts with the adults in the building. A lot of the times we try to analyze from student to adult versus adult to adult, and then allow that process to trickle down to the students and to the families in the community. So in my experience, my last school that I'm implemented restorative practices is Cardozo. How we kind of started out, we had four trainings through IRP, International Institute for Restorative Practices. Then from that point, we actually began a program called Train the Trainer. And this is where staff members, about 8 to 10, were certified trainers to then train staff. That occurred 2 years ago. In that process, we started with, responsive circles. We started with creating a tradition with circles in our team meetings, in our faculty meetings, when we were problem solving and planning. We wanted that ritual to hold true in everything that we did. So when it came to the point where we were illustrating it with our students knew what the process looked like. They understood what the talking piece looked like. They understood that it was going to be a level of respect from everyone. But it's really become a problem solving, a planning space where there's equity of voice, which is important for us to promote student voice. So equity of voice has been a major part And now we make sure for any disciplinary infraction, we make sure every student has fair process and goes through the restorative process before any decision is made on any disciplinary action. And then also that goes into a big part of the staff, the staff buy-in to the practice. We do come from a society we want quick fixes, but when those quick fixes become repetitive leaks in the system, that's when the adults understand that we need a different approach. So it's constant training. We actually just had a PD on Friday, but it's constant training, constant practicing, modeling, role playing in different scenarios, because working in this field, we hear a lot of different things, and our response is what can make or break the situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I've experienced some of that with you as well, so I definitely understand. So this is our last question for our panelists, right? What advice would you give to educators who are considering bringing restorative justice practices to their school? Dr. Connor, can you go, please?
Sure. So the most important thing is to get support for your enthusiasm. If you're considering it, I'm assuming something that you've heard has touched you and you see some possibilities. So do some reading. Or some, check out the videos. There's lots of bibliographies that can point you to some of the most compelling things, and share that with people. Mention it to your colleagues. Find people at your schools, people doing the same thing as you, people doing different things, administration, staff, social work and psychology staff, and see if you can get a nucleus of people who are really excited about the thought of making a difference. Get together for lunchtime. Then check out Restorative DC. The community of practice events are free, and they are amazing. Not only do you get great content, but you get to network and you get to hear the stories of others who are doing this work. And it's challenging because, as John says, it is a different mindset, but so freeing. So most important thing is buddy up with people of other interests. And when you start hearing of a conference or something, by all means, if you can, go and hear. You'll hear some amazing stuff about what's happening nationally and internationally to bring healing and peace to our world and our schools.
Thank you, Dr. Connor. I definitely appreciated that. So now we're at the final part of the webinar, and this is a place where the attendees can ask questions to myself or either Dr. Connor or Mr. Jackson. This is the space to ask it. So I see one question so far from Stephanie Nash. She asked, how did you address buy-in with culture shift about ISS and out-of-school suspension when a student has been physically harmed, punched, kicked, etc.? Parents' response and staff response. When it comes to buy-in, that process, it takes time, and that's a real thing. It's not going to happen overnight, especially when things get hectic. It takes a lot of people. People revert usually to their natural instincts, which is typically the traditional way of discipline. In that response, and when it comes to addressing buy-in from the culture shift, it just has to happen. The parents, and from the beginning of the school year, need to understand the approach that's taken and provide the parents with trainings, as well as provide them with experiential things, like when they come to back to school night, they're experiencing what a circle looks like, so that they know from the beginning of the school year that that's the purpose of the school, that's the model, that's what the school is trying to do. So that when these type of situations happen, they're not surprised with, oh my God, I cannot believe you didn't suspend that kid for physically harming my child. Now it's to, okay, I understand that this is a restorative school, this is a process we're going through, and they're more inclined to be a part of the process. In regards to staff, the culture has to be built within the school. As Dr. Connor said earlier, finding people who are like-minded or have the same enthusiasm as you to implement restorative practices within the school. And then also providing those trainings throughout the year, like Mr. Jackson did at Cardozo, to like give the staff a better understanding of what is going on. Because I feel like a lot of times we have these new initiatives or these new ways of doing things, and the people that it directly involves, the people that have to facilitate or do the new initiative, they have an understanding of it, but those surrounding them don't. So in that regard, that's how you would get more of a staff buy-in, by letting them as well experience what restorative practices is, from all the way from community building to responsive circles, allowing them to be a part of the process as well as the parents. So when this conversation happens or when this conference happens, they're not surprised, and they're more inclined to be a part of what's going on. I hope that answers your question, Stephanie. So I'm just waiting in if anybody else has any more questions to ask our panelists as well as myself. Go ahead. Here's the floor for you.
Let's see, Tone, this is Jane. Are you hearing me?
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to amplify the idea about giving experience to the staff and the parents. That's really crucial. The other thing is, because each person is coming with their own perspective, is to understand what their concerns are. What is it they really want to accomplish? As a parent, the first thought might be, yeah, I want you to suspend that kid for 25 days for what he did. And what is it the parent is hoping for? What do they want for their child? Usually what they're wanting is for the child to be safe, for the child to be comfortable at school and to be able to learn and to grow. So when they say I want that kid suspended for 25 days, they're sort of wanting to protect the child. Now, what is it will help to provide that protection? Will it be having an angry, suspended child who's disconnected more from school? Or will it be bringing in a child where they have a chance to understand that what they did really hurt someone? And that often people don't, young people, old people, we don't realize how our actions affect others. So the purpose, the intention for the punishment is to try to help people to learn. And if we put our focus on the learning, will the suspension without any opportunity to see the direct relationship between their actions and the impact on others, is that what will promote learning?
And just to kind of piggyback on that, I always stress to my teachers and let them know students can't learn from people they don't like. Students can't receive all the instruction that a teacher is delivering unless there's a relationship of some kind. And how that works in the whole school is, if you have 70% of your staff that are intentional about building relationships in your school, there's a different level of respect and ownership and accountability. So where a situation may have been where you can redirect the student versus having a crisis, that relationship will then only be a mere redirection versus a crisis. And that comes from that relationship building. Then you can dive a little bit deeper on what the issue was versus the adults responding to the behavior that's illustrated by a student. And what restorative practices allows you to dig deeper into looking into the issue versus the behavior that's illustrated. A lot of times we respond to what we see and not respond to what we know. And this process allows us to continuously learn our students. And once again, it takes adult vulnerability in making this process work as well, to where our students can get to know us as human beings and not just the title and the position that we hold. And that kind of breaks down the barriers and the walls to where there's engagement and there's collaboration between adults and students.
Absolutely. So I see that we do have more questions. Amanda asked, how do you get students to buy into this when they refuse to participate? Personally, I feel that when it comes to getting students to buy in, it's based on the person that's presenting it, right? If the person presenting it is not enthusiastic and not willing to go all in and just push to try to get everyone to be involved and to be engaged, then the students are going to notice that immediately. And they're going to notice and they're going to say like, oh, this is not a big deal. This is not important to them, or this is not a good idea. Because a totally different person can present the same exact information and the students are more inclined to buy in. And then also it depends on the relationship with the student. If the student, with the student and the staff member, if the student doesn't care for the staff member, like Mr. Jackson said, they're not going to do it. They're not. There's more relationship building that needs to be done in order for that process to happen within the classroom. And then also, not even just with teachers, with any staff member in general that is looking to lead a group or lead a circle within the school building, there's more relationship building that needs to be held. Okay, this is a very important one, and I'm gonna have actually Mr. Jackson talk about this. Answer this question: Is there a place for logical consequences? Can you speak on that?
So yeah, so the other part to restorative practices, restorative practice is not in lieu of discipline. So discipline can still exist, but how we want to frame and how we want to message it is accountability. Am I accountable for my actions? Do I have ownership in my actions? Do I have ownership in my response? There can still be, so I'll give you an example. We had a student brings a knife to school, goes through the metal detector, tries to hide it. This is the student's second time. First time, it was a parent conference, restorative conference. Second time they brought it in. There is a level of accountability, and how I explain to the students are, you're in these four walls. If you go to an airport, they're not going to have a conversation with you bringing a weapon. So students need to understand the harsh reality as well. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm allow you to process and figure out why that is important and what are some next steps. The student was then put into, we don't have ISS anymore, we have Alternative Learning Center. So the student was placed in our Alternative Learning Center for 2 days, but the student was also provided support. And within our Alternative Learning Center, there's a staff member there. They reflect on the infraction, on the incident, and what they try to do is create a game plan when they leave, create a game plan of what they can do next, potential challenges, and what they perceive as needed support. So there is a process. You can still hold students accountable, but we don't want to use the word discipline, because discipline to them may look totally different than what accountability and ownership is. So we want our students to own their actions, and you have to hold some type of order and control in the school as well, but you want the students to understand the part that they play in that process as well.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. I appreciate that one. So, Dr. Connor, there's a question from Sheila Clark Coleman that states, you discussed restorative practice at the high school level. Have you considered implementing the practice at the middle school level? How does that look?
Right, absolutely. In fact, many elementary schools, and I had the pleasure even of watching a kindergarten teacher who does mediations. And in fact, I've done mediations even with my 4- and 5-year-old grandchildren. So this type of, as long as the language is there, the notion of caring for each other and listening to each other and being heard, that people listen to us and hear us, and that's what we want to do with them. These ideas are appropriate and helpful at all levels, and so middle school is great, and the earlier the better. In fact, one of my grandsons, he said to me, you know, they get it sooner. He said, Mom, you know, I think those people need a restorative circle.
That's amazing. That's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
So this is going to be our last question, since our time is coming to an end within 2 minutes. So I'm trying to find a question that we can answer within that time span. Excuse me.
And in the meantime, while Tone is looking up a good question to end with, this is Annette with OSSE, just reminding you that we have a lot of upcoming professional development opportunities for restorative practices. We have our monthly community of practice that SchoolTalk and Tone and his colleagues are involved with. It's held at a different school location each month. I've put the link in the chat box and the question box to go to the registration page. It's great if you can come every month, even if you cannot come every month. If you can only come on a certain month here or there, we'd love to have all of you involved in the conversation and learning more about implementation at the community of practice. We also have a workshop coming up on circle keeping for restorative practices. I've also included that registration link in the chat box. All right, Tone, back to you.
Thank you, Annette. This is the last question. It's from, I want to say, Dolce Nunez. It says, how do I identify when is the moment to use restorative practices? His question comes from how are we always to reach out and individually speaking to our students on some situations? Mr. Jackson, do you want to go to end us off?
Can you repeat that question?
How do I identify when is the moment to use restorative practices with students?
I always use this. Check your temperature, and then check the temperature of a student. There are sometimes we might be worked up depending on our own personal life. It could be a situation at work. It could be a disagreement with your colleague. It could be you feel undervalued by your admin. You could be just tired. In those situations, you have to ask yourself, am I going to get the most bang for my buck in this situation? And sometimes it's no. And sometimes you feel comfortable being able to facilitate a conversation. The other part is students need to be willing participants. If they are forced into it, you got to go back to the relationship building and the community building. But if a student should have some level of choice, because if not, you go back to that social discipline window. Even though you want to be restorative, you can have a punitive approach. And if you don't participate in this meeting, I'm gonna give you 2 days. I'm gonna give you 3 days, and I'm gonna go call your mother. So you want the students to have a open mind and have ownership. Once that student has ownership in that meeting space, they're more willing to become vulnerable in that situation where they can receive the support that the adult is trying to give. And then also, it's important for the adult to be able to receive the student's perspective as well. Sometimes the students may say something that we don't necessarily agree with. Once again, it's how our response, and sometimes our response to our students are inappropriate to the point where it drives that student away.
Gotcha. Thank you, Mr. Jackson. I really do appreciate it. I just want to thank everyone for coming out. On the screen right now, you have my contact information as well as our executive director, who is the program manager for Restorative DC. I just want to thank everyone for listening to the webinar. And if you check in the chat, that's where we have the links to all of our upcoming workshops. If you don't know, this webinar is a prerequisite for our circle keeping workshop, which is coming up on November 17th. And that link is also in the bio. I just want to thank everyone once again, and I hope everyone has a blessed day.
Thank you, Tone. Same to you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everyone.